Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday, and I wanted to focus on a short story that is all about
the apocalypse.
I am referring to Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster by Lucy Corin, which comes from her short story collection 100 Apocalypses and Other Apocalypses by of course, Lucy Corin, in a book that does this, interestingly, and this was published around 2013. For those who don't know, Lucy Corin is an American author who's been published since around the mid-2000s, probably trying to get her work published even earlier than that, because people are always struggling in that regards. But she's about a 20-year author or so, mostly with short stories, but also a novel, including writing one novel about the 2008 financial crisis, set in a sort of a comic tone, which I would be interested in checking out. A lot of people have said that her work often focuses on sort of like internal conflicts, and that she often over exaggerates like feelings, thoughts, and whatnot to make a point, which you do see a lot of in this book in particular. Although I will note that it does make it somewhat difficult to really figure out what people are feeling when it's not really said so plainly. But that's mainly an argument with style there, maybe not something to my particular liking, but overall I did enjoy this story. What I find very interesting is that this has a an autograph from Lucy, even though it's a library copy. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. It just says "for the Davis community" or something like that. And I was like, that's interesting. How did Lucy come across my town's library? And I think I already said it, so that's unfortunate. But I looked it up, and it turns out that she works at the same college that I work at, which, small world, right? But I think that's pretty interesting. Maybe I'll cross paths with her at some point and tell her that I enjoyed some of her work. It's always nice to be able to tell an author to their face that they did some high quality work. But yeah, that's pretty much all I know about her. So without further ado, let's talk about Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. I'll do a little summary, an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster focuses on Patrick. He is a teenager living in the United States. And at the start of the story, he has a bit of a troubled relationship with his family. I think he's reaching a point where he's starting to question everything that they do instead of taking their word as gospel. And one particular problem that takes place at the center of this is that Patrick was digging around through his father's cabinets, his father's drawers, and on a lower drawer where he figures porn should have been, he actually finds Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, a VHS tape of that. And he's watching it one night at 3 a.m., finding that it lacks porn, and it's actually terrifying him in a lot of ways because of the extreme and harrowing nature of Godzilla. Given that he was probably expecting something else while watching it. The narrator notes that he's not going to recall really anything from the movie later on. But he goes to school the next day, and the teacher, Mr. Bernard, turns on the TV, and a news anchor is talking about an all-consuming fire in California. It seems like a wildfire, but it's also expanding and hitting many populated cities, sort of like an apocalypse, but kind of vague in that sense. And the narrator and Patrick note in particular that the like Mr. Bernard usually puts on a strong face, but in recent past, as students have started dying and more tragedies like this fire have happened, he's kind of reached his wit's end, and things are very difficult for him. And so really this seems to be the major news story that's taking up everything. This fire, when he goes home, he hears about it there as well. I think the students are sent home early from school, and Patrick travels home with a neighbor who lives on the same street as him, a girl named Sarah, who I think he likes and wants to have a relationship with. But given all the circumstances of this somewhat apocalypse, he's wondering if he should even fall for her or anything like that. They end up traveling to a cave where Sarah talks about wanting to go to California, but given that California is on fire, that might not be a possibility for her in the near future. She also seems somewhat hostile towards Patrick, and so I don't think they ever really form a relationship. And Sarah, they go back home, and then a couple days later, Patrick finds out that Sarah has disappeared. Whether she was kidnapped or just left on her own accord, it's not really made clear, but Patrick's family decides to be there for Sarah's family since they are neighbors. And around this time too, while they're watching a news broadcast about the ever-expanding fire getting to Nevada or something like that, Patrick finally decides to confront his dad about why he has the Godzilla versus the Smog monster and why it was placed in another location. His dad never really answers the question, and when he does provide an answer, Patrick believes that he's lying to him. Although why he would lie, it's not exactly clear. And as the story comes to a close, Patrick looks out towards the woods and feels like the land no longer belongs to him, kind of like he's in a foreign location, and it kind of ends on that downer note there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about in Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. An amazing title for something that, kind of doesn't need that sort of title. It's very misleading, but also somewhat funny. One of the ideas that Lucy Corin is working with here is that of an internal crisis. Indeed, many critics have noted that she often talks about internal crises. It's sort of her thing that she's going to write about, her major theme of her work. And Patrick seems to be dealing with this. He's dealing with normal teenage fears and anxieties, but he's also dealing with the pressures of the current day, of this moment in history in which he is living. So he's dealing with friends, kind of questioning his friend, coming into conflict with his political philosophy, where his friend seems to be growing ever increasingly socialist, wanting to challenge the system, but Patrick noting that he's happy where he's at, kind of wondering why things need to change at all, questioning his family, especially as his family does stranger and stranger things, and also reaching that point where he wants to have a girlfriend, and he feels that Sarah might fit that mold, even though she later disappears. So regular teenage stuff, but this is combined with the stuff that's causing the crisis for him, the internal stuff, of being at a point where it feels like the end of the world. I don't think California is actually on fire in this story. It might just seem like that's what's happening to a teenager who's barely paying attention to the news, but knows that something bad has happened. And indeed, I kind of experienced that. I thought that 9/11 was a million times worse than what it was when I first saw it, because I was 10 years old at the time. I knew it was bad, but my mind kind of extrapolated because of all the hubbub on the news and whatnot. And that might be what's going on for Patrick, that he's experiencing climate change and the news about all that, and it seems like there's a fire building in California getting ready to consume everything. And you can see how that would make someone anxious, knowing that there might not be a promised tomorrow anymore. Whereas in the past, there might have been, but now climate change is getting ready to consume Earth and change everything that we know and love about it. I do think it's interesting about the Smog monster, like Godzilla versus the Smog monster. I think capturing the absurdity and the sort of crucial tension and crisis within Patrick, because it's a weird thing for your dad to hide from the rest of the family. If it's not porn and it's actually Godzilla versus the Smog monster, a normal movie that people might want to watch, like, and a movie that I don't think actually exists, and I'll have to look it up after this video ends just to make sure, it's weird to have there, but it's normal. But why would he try to hide it? Is the question. And he's like, when he asks his father, he feels that his dad is lying to him, and so maybe it's a moment where he realizes that his parents don't know as much as he thought they did. That they're actually just human beings, and that he placed this all-knowing, sort of omniscient, tagline to them that maybe doesn't actually belong to them. And so it's a moment of forced growth, viewing your parents differently, and trying to come to terms with all of that in a very tumultuous time, both, for all teenagers, but also in this current historical moment. And I love how Lucy Corin captures all of that. But another aspect of this that is kind of related to the internal crisis is that of the chaotic world, living in unfamiliar, uncertain times, because it feels like the world is ending in this story. With climate change and people saying there might not be a tomorrow. Again, there might not be a promised tomorrow, that California might catch fire, there might be more hurricanes, or the air might become less breathable, or animals might go extinct. It feels like there's not a whole lot to hope for right there. With the California fire, it seems like all of California, all of the West Coast is just burning down. And even in parts of the East Coast, there are forest fires too. So to constantly see all of this on the news, it's terrifying. But whereas with like regular apocalypses, like zombies or asteroids or the sun engulfing the earth, those are rapid. But this one is very slow. It's a slow, prodding apocalypse, and where the end is coming eventually, but you still have to live your normal life, and it feels incredibly surreal. How do you keep going to school? How do you, try to start relationships and get married and get jobs when the world feels like it's ending, when it feels like that, like tomorrow is not really going to happen? There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. Again, he feels cozy. He can't help it. California is burning, the fire gobbling Eureka, all that marijuana up in smoke. People and animals are dying. The air is poisoned. The ocean is boiling. Fishes making for Hawaii as fast as their flippers will carry them. Rock tops exploding from sea cliffs like missiles. And he feels cozy trying to figure out if maybe he's attracted to Sarah. He knows that one about how people have sex in the last moments before the end of the world, but it doesn't feel like the end of the world. Is that why he doesn't feel like he ought to be having sex? And it's an interesting sort of like dilemma for him. Like, he knows that everything is going wrong around him, and in those moments, like you shouldn't want to have a relationship or try to do anything that won't save your own life or save the earth. And yet here he is wanting to have what every teenager wants to have. And that there's probably guilt there's anxiety, there's joy, there's sadness. It's all there, and it's adding to all of that internal crisis for Patrick. And what I can say is that there seem to be a lot of parallels to something that happened recently, back in March of 2020, where COVID was happening, and it seemed like everyone was getting COVID and people were dying. New York City and many other cities were like overflowing with dead bodies, and we were like, how is our country going to survive this? How do we go on having a normal life in the midst of this horrific situation? And there is no easy answer there. There was no easy answer for Patrick. He just sort of has to go through while feeling in this changing, unfamiliar landscape. And I felt the same way during COVID. Applying for jobs, trying to move, trying to be in a different position in life. it's unrecognizable, and it's hard to go forward when you feel that the end of the world is right around the corner. It's something I hear a lot on Twitter and Facebook. It seems to be the sentiment of the time. Another element of the story that's interesting, I don't know if I'm 100% of a fan of it, is the matter-of-fact writing. Corin is very succinct with her writing. Like she writes points rather than trying to weave poetics or make it flow in any sort of way. Like she starts out the story by saying Patrick is a teenager. Patrick is 14. He's feeling this. He's thinking that. Like it's very like short and to the point, which is certainly a style of writing. I don't think it's bad, but because I encountered it with The Shadow King by Maza Mengiste, which I thought was an amazing book. But in a short instance like this, it doesn't allow you to flesh out your characters as much as you could hope for. So I don't think it works as well in, say, a longer form book like The Shadow King. And again, there's some layered writing down there, like exaggerated and things lying beneath the surface, which I don't completely understand. And maybe there isn't really a point to be made by Corin there. Maybe it is what it is on the surface, but it certainly makes it difficult to parse through at times. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Godzilla versus the Smog monster. I do want to say how it's interesting that she's captured, the feeling of the current moment, especially in the wake of COVID and climate change, all the way back in 2013 when this was written. Sure, we were focused on climate change then, and there were forest fires and all kinds of bad things happening. But Donald Trump wasn't elected yet. COVID wasn't a thing. And, there's a whole bunch of other factors related to that. Like, we were still in the Obama presidency where we had some modicum of hope, and now we don't seem to have much of that. So I feel like she kind of jumped forward in time to capture the feeling of the moment. Certainly an interesting story worth seeking out. So, go to your local library or perhaps purchase this. I think it could be an interesting purchase. If you have any comments about it, if you want to tell me what you thought about it, if you read it before, do so below. Let's have a discussion about it. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want, in case you don't know about in case other people don't know about the author or this book or this short story in particular. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Godzilla-y travels. Farewell.